A desperate farmer stands before a row of executives in a gleaming corporate boardroom, shocking documents clutched in his weathered hands as security personnel move to escort him out. Just 72 hours earlier, he had stopped to help a stranded motorist on a dusty back road, using the last of his mechanical skills to repair the man's luxury car. Now surrounded by the agricultural conglomerate that's been quietly destroying his livelihood, he must reveal a truth that will either save his family's land or cost him everything he has left. Before we jump deeper into this incredible story, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And if you're intrigued by what's coming, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's video reveals an even more unbelievable twist of fate you won't want to miss. Jack Harmon wiped sweat from his sun-weathered face as he studied the foreclosure notice that had arrived that morning. The harsh July sun beat down on the parched fields surrounding his farmhouse, fields that had been in the Harmon family for 4 generations. At 45, the deep creases around Jack's eyes told the story of years battling drought, market fluctuations, and increasingly impossible odds. The 180 acres of once thriving corn and soybean fields now stood withered and struggling, despite Jack's relentless work and agricultural knowledge. The irrigation system needed repairs he couldn't afford, and the ancient tractor parked beside the barn had been cannibalized for parts to keep other equipment running. His storage silos, once filled to capacity every harvest, now stood half-empty, monuments to better times. Unlike the massive operations that now dominated Willow Creek Valley, Jack had refused to sell to Meridian Agriculture Industries, the corporate giant that had been systematically acquiring family farms throughout the region. While his neighbors had accepted buyout offers, some generous, others barely enough to cover debts, Jack remained committed to the independence his grandfather had instilled in him. "You can't feed a community with quarterly profit reports," his grandfather used to say. Those words echoed in Jack's mind as he folded the foreclosure notice and tucked it into his pocket. 30 days. That's all the time he had left before the bank would take everything. He walked toward his small workshop where he'd been repairing an old grain auger, hoping to have it functional before the meager harvest began. The workshop had once been filled with the sounds of activity and laughter when neighboring farmers would gather to help each other maintain equipment. Now it stood as a quiet reminder of a disappearing way of life. The framed photograph on the workshop wall caught his eye. Jack, standing proudly with his late wife Emma beside their first bumper crop 15 years ago. Emma had been gone for 3 years now, cancer taking her quickly and leaving him alone to raise their daughter Sophie through her college years. The medical bills had been the beginning of his financial troubles, though he never regretted spending every penny trying to save her. Jack picked up a wrench and returned to the stubborn bolt on the grain auger. His truck needed repairs too. The transmission was slipping and the radiator leaked, but the auger took priority. Without it, he couldn't move what little grain he might harvest to the storage bins. His phone rang, breaking the afternoon stillness. It was Sophie, who now worked as an agricultural scientist at the State University's research station 50 miles away. "Dad, did you check those soil samples I asked about?" she began without preamble. "The preliminary results from neighboring? Plots are concerning. There's something strange happening with the chemical composition, and it's not consistent with normal agricultural practices." "Haven't had time," Jack admitted, not mentioning the foreclosure notice. Sophie had enough worries with her research and her young family. "Been trying to get the irrigation running again." "This is important, Dad," Sophie pressed. "The pattern of soil degradation doesn't match drought conditions or standard fertilizer applications. It's almost as if someone's deliberately altering the soil chemistry," Jack finished, voicing a suspicion that had been growing in his mind for months. "I can't make that accusation without more evidence," Sophie replied cautiously. "But yes, that's what the data suggests. And the effects are concentrated around farms that border Meridian properties. Jack stepped outside, phone pressed to his ear, and gazed toward his eastern boundary where Meridian's perfectly uniform crops grew tall and green despite the same drought conditions that were killing his fields. The contrast had always bothered him, but he'd attributed it to their advanced irrigation systems and proprietary seed varieties. "I'll get those samples to you tomorrow," Jack promised. "And Sophie, don't share these concerns with anyone else yet. Meridian has a lot of influence at the university." "Be careful, Dad," Sophie added, her voice softening. "Professor Whitaker was asking questions about similar soil anomalies last semester. His funding was cut the following week, and he's now teaching at a community college in Nevada." After hanging up, Jack continued working on the auger, his mind churning with both the immediate threat of foreclosure and the disturbing implications of Sophie's research. If Meridian was somehow tampering with neighboring soil chemistry to force sales, but that seemed far-fetched, even for a corporation with Meridian's resources and ruthless reputation. The sound of an approaching vehicle caught Jack's attention. Visitors were rare these days. Most of his farmer friends had either sold out or were struggling too much themselves to socialize. He stepped out of the workshop, squinting against the sun, to see an expensive black car making its way down his dusty driveway, moving slowly, as if the driver was concerned about the vehicle's pristine finish. For a moment, Jack's heart sank, assuming it was another Meridian representative with yet another buyout offer. They'd been increasingly persistent as his financial troubles mounted, somehow always knowing exactly how desperate his situation was becoming. But as the car drew closer, Jack realized it wasn't one of Meridian's fleet vehicles. It was a sleek, German sedan, the kind that cost more than his entire farm was worth now, and it was billowing steam from under the hood. The car rolled to a stop near his workshop, and a man in his early 50s stepped out, looking distinctly out of place in his tailored suit and polished shoes, now covered in dust. He surveyed the steaming hood with an expression of refined annoyance, like someone accustomed to problems being solved for him rather than by him. "Car trouble," Jack called out, setting down his wrench and walking toward the stranger. The man turned, relief washing over his face. "Yes, unfortunately. It just started overheating about a mile back. I was hoping to find a service station, but my GPS shows nothing nearby." His voice carried the polished accent of someone educated at expensive schools, but there was no condescension in his tone, just genuine gratitude at finding help. "Nearest mechanic is in Riverdale, about 20 miles from here," Jack replied, approaching the vehicle. "Mind if I take a look? I'm pretty handy with engines." "Please," the man said, stepping aside. "I'd be incredibly grateful. I have an important meeting tomorrow I can't miss." Jack popped the hood, wincing at the cloud of steam that escaped. His problems would still be there tomorrow. Right now, he had the simple, solvable task of fixing this stranger's car, a welcome distraction from the complications of his own life. Jack's farm had once been the pride of Willow Creek Valley, known for its innovative, sustainable practices and high yields. His grandfather had started with just 40 acres after returning from World War II, gradually expanding through hard work and shrewd management. By the time Jack's father took over in the 1980s, Harmon Farms had grown to 180 acres of prime agricultural land, with a reputation for quality that allowed them to weather even the farm crisis of that decade. Jack had grown up learning every aspect of farm operation, from equipment repair to crop rotation strategies. After earning his degree in agricultural science, he had returned home to implement new sustainable farming techniques, balancing his father's traditional knowledge with modern innovations. For nearly 15 years, the farm had thrived under their shared management. Then came the perfect storm of challenges. 3 consecutive years of drought had coincided with Jack's father's declining health and Emma's cancer diagnosis. Medical bills mounted as crop yields declined. By the time Jack buried both his father and wife within 6 months of each other, the farm's financial foundation had begun to crumble. In the midst of this personal and financial crisis, Meridian Agriculture Industries had arrived in Willow Creek Valley. The publicly traded agricultural giant began quietly acquiring struggling farms, replacing diverse crops with their proprietary seed varieties and traditional farmhouses with modern operational centers. Their representatives, always in pressed suits and driving shiny SUVs, spoke of agricultural efficiency and modernizing rural economies. What they didn't mention was how their operations would transform the community. Local equipment repair shops closed when Meridian contracted exclusively with regional dealers. The grain elevator and feed mill that had served family farms for generations shut down after Meridian built their own state-of-the-art processing facility. Jack had watched with growing concern as familiar faces disappeared from the community. The Petersons, whose family had farmed neighboring land for over a century, sold after Robert Peterson's heart attack left them unable to manage the spring. Planting. The Williams siblings, unable to compete with Meridian's economies of scale, accepted a buyout that barely covered their debts. Even old man Jenkins, who had sworn he'd die before selling his family's heritage, had eventually capitulated when his well mysteriously dried up. Through it all, Jack had stubbornly held onto the family farm, refusing multiple offers from Meridian's persistent representatives. His resistance wasn't just about preserving family legacy. It was about maintaining a way of life he believed in, one where farming wasn't just a business, but a responsibility to the land and community. The problem with these corporate operations, Jack had explained to Sophie during one of their heated discussions, is that they don't have to live with the consequences of their practices. They can extract everything from the soil for 10 years, abandon the land when it's depleted, and move on to the next acquisition. Our family's been here for 4 generations. We have to think about the next 4. Sophie understood his principles, but worried about the practical realities. With her scientific background, she recognized that modern agriculture required capital investment that small farmers increasingly couldn't access. She'd encouraged her father to consider Meridian's partnership programs that supposedly allowed farmers to maintain ownership while gaining access to their advanced technologies. "It's a trap," Jack had insisted. "Read the fine print. Those contracts give them control over every decision. What to plant, when to harvest, which chemicals to use. You end up an employee on your own land." What Jack hadn't told Sophie was how personal the conflict had become. Richard Keller, Meridian's regional acquisition manager, had moved from professional persistence to thinly veiled threats during his last visit. "The Willow Creek Watershed Management Plan is being revised next month," Keller had mentioned casually as he was leaving. "Interesting how water rights can suddenly change with a few signatures on regulatory documents, especially for holdout properties that don't have the legal resources to challenge new allocations." That conversation had occurred just 2 weeks before Jack's crops began showing signs of unusual distress, and shortly before neighboring wells started reporting water quality issues. The timing was too convenient to be coincidence, but proving corporate sabotage against a company with Meridian's resources and political connections seemed impossible. Now, facing foreclosure, Jack's options had narrowed dramatically. The bank needed $175,000, impossible to raise from a failing harvest. His equipment was too old to fetch meaningful prices. The land itself was his only real asset, and Meridian knew it. Their most recent offer, delivered just 3 days ago, had been significantly lower than previous ones. They could smell his desperation and were circling like vultures. Jack had one slender hope. Sophie's research might eventually prove that Meridian was deliberately contaminating neighboring properties, but Scientific evidence took time to collect and verify, and the foreclosure deadline wouldn't wait. Without a miracle, the Harmon family's century of agricultural tradition would end with him, another casualty in the quiet war between corporate agriculture and family farms. And now, as if the universe had a twisted sense of humor, he found himself helping a wealthy stranger in an expensive car, someone from the exact world that was systematically destroying his way of life. Yet despite everything, Jack couldn't bring himself to turn away someone in need. His grandfather's other favorite saying echoed in his mind, "Character is what you do when no one's watching." So he turned his attention to the steaming luxury car, pushing his own troubles aside temporarily as he assessed the damage to the vehicle's cooling system. "Looks like your radiator hose has a split," Jack said, leaning under the hood of the luxury sedan. "And you're low on coolant. That's why you're overheating." The stranger loosened his silk tie in the afternoon heat. "Can it be fixed? I'm Alexander Grant, by the way." He extended a manicured hand that contrasted sharply with Jack's calloused palm. "Jack Harmon," he replied, wiping his hand on his jeans, before accepting the handshake. "And yes, I can patch it temporarily. Should get you to Riverdale at least." "I'd be incredibly grateful," Alexander said, relief evident in his voice. "I have a crucial meeting in Cedar Rapids tomorrow morning that I can't miss." Jack rummaged through his workshop, finding an old piece of radiator hose that could be adapted to fit the German car. It wasn't a perfect match, but with some improvisation, it would work. As he gathered tools and supplies, he noticed Alexander, studying the farm with what seemed like genuine interest rather than casual politeness. "Been farming long?" Alexander asked, removing his suit jacket and carefully draping it over a nearby fence post. "All my life," Jack answered as he worked. "Fourth generation on this land." "Challenging business," Alexander observed. "Especially these days, with the climate issues and market volatility." There was something in his tone, an informed awareness rather than superficial sympathy, that caught Jack's attention. "You know something about agriculture?" Alexander smiled slightly. "I've been involved with the industry for most of my career, yes, though more on the business side than the practical side." He gestured to Jack's skilled hands working on the engine. "I've always admired people who can actually fix things, create things, grow things." Jack worked silently for a moment, connecting the replacement hose and securing it with clamps. "Your business side wouldn't happen to be with Meridian, would it?" He couldn't keep the edge from his voice. Alexander looked genuinely surprised. "Meridian? No, not at all. Why do you ask?" "They've been buying up every farm in the valley," Jack explained, focusing on the repair to avoid showing too much emotion. "Thought maybe you were another one of their representatives, lost on the way to pressure another family into selling." "I assure you I'm not," Alexander said, his expression thoughtful. "Though I'm familiar with their acquisition strategies. They've been particularly aggressive in several agricultural regions." Jack added coolant to the reservoir, his curiosity piqued by Alexander's comment. It suggested knowledge beyond what an ordinary businessman might possess. "You sound like you've studied them." "You could say that," Alexander replied carefully. "I try to stay informed about major players in the agricultural sector. Corporate farming has significant implications for food security, rural communities, and environmental sustainability." The diplomatic phrasing made Jack smile grimly. "That's one way to put it. Another way is that companies like Meridian are systematically destroying family farming and everything it stands for." To Jack's surprise, Alexander didn't immediately disagree or offer the standard corporate platitudes about efficiency and progress. Instead, he asked, "May I?" and gestured toward the eastern boundary of Jack's property, where Meridian's crops grew in stark contrast to his struggling fields. As they walked toward the property line, Jack felt a strange sense of relief at being able to show someone, even a stranger, what he was facing. Alexander's questions were perceptive, focusing on irrigation patterns, soil quality, and crop health with unexpected technical knowledge. When they reached the boundary, Alexander knelt and examined the soil on both sides, rubbing it between his fingers and even smelling it in a way that reminded Jack of his grandfather's old-school farming methods. "How long has the contrast been this dramatic?" Alexander asked, gesturing to the visible line where Jack's struggling corn met Meridian's thriving crops. "Started about 8 months ago," Jack explained. "Got worse this growing season." "And your daughter mentioned unusual soil chemistry?" Alexander asked, referring to the phone conversation he'd partially overheard earlier. Jack hesitated, suddenly cautious about sharing Sophie's suspicions with a stranger, no matter how knowledgeable he seemed. "She's found some anomalies in soil samples, nothing conclusive." Alexander's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the boundary. "The pattern is consistent with targeted soil degradation. I've seen similar situations in other regions where Meridian has expanded aggressively." He stood, brushing dirt from his hands, with a handkerchief that probably cost more than Jack's best work shirt. "It's illegal, of course, but extremely difficult to prove." "You sound like you've investigated this before," Jack said, studying Alexander with new interest. "Let's just say I have a professional interest in ethical agricultural practices," Alexander replied, his expression becoming guarded again. He checked his watch, a timepiece that could have paid off a significant portion of Jack's debt. "I should call my office and let them know I'll be delayed." As they walked back to the workshop, Jack noticed Alexander taking photos of the property line with his phone, paying particular attention to the irrigation access points and drainage patterns. The behavior seemed odd for someone who claimed to be just passing through, but Jack was too preoccupied with finishing the car repair to question it further. By the time Jack completed the radiator hose replacement, the afternoon was fading into early evening. He closed the hood and wiped his hands on a shop rag. "That should get you to Riverdale. Thompson's garage on Main Street can replace it properly." "You can't thank you enough," Alexander said, reaching for his wallet. "Please, let me pay you for your time and materials." Jack waved him off. "Just helping a stranded traveler. Would have done the same for anyone." Alexander looked as if he wanted to insist, but instead asked, "Could I at least buy you dinner? There must be somewhere nearby we could grab a meal. I'd like to hear more about your operation here." The invitation surprised Jack. He hadn't eaten at a restaurant in months, carefully managing every dollar to keep the farm afloat, but his curiosity about Alexander and his apparent knowledge of Meridian's tactics outweighed his pride. "Mabel's diner in town makes a decent burger," he suggested. "Nothing fancy but good food." "Perfect," Alexander replied with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. "I'll follow you there." As Jack led the way in his battered pickup, Alexander following in his luxury sedan, he couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter was somehow significant. The stranger knew too much about agriculture and Meridian to be a typical businessman, yet he clearly wasn't a farmer. There was something Alexander wasn't revealing about himself, something that might be important to Jack's increasingly desperate situation. What Jack couldn't possibly know was that their dinner conversation would reveal secrets that would completely transform his understanding of the battle for Willow Creek Valley and potentially provide the miracle he needed to save his family's legacy. Creating these real-life inspirational stories takes countless hours of research, interviews, and careful crafting to bring you the authentic struggles facing America's family farmers. We believe these stories matter. They're the untold battles happening across rural America that rarely make headlines but affect the very food on your table and the communities that have been the backbone of our nation for generations. If this story of determination and unexpected connections resonates with you, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Your support allows us to continue documenting these important narratives that might otherwise go untold. We read every comment, so let us know your thoughts below. Have you witnessed the struggles of family farms in your community? Do you have suggestions for other stories we should explore? Many viewers have asked how they can support local family farms directly. We've included links in the description to organizations that connect consumers with independent farmers in your region. Even small changes in how you shop for groceries can make a meaningful difference to families like Jack's. For those of you who've been with us since the beginning of this channel, you know these stories are more than just content. They're our passion and mission. For new viewers, welcome to our community of people who care deeply about the real human experiences that shape our world. Together, we're shining a light on struggles and triumphs that deserve attention. And now, let's return to Jack and Alexander as they head to Mabel's diner, where a conversation over simple food will reveal extraordinary connections that neither man anticipated when the day began. The revelations waiting at that small-town diner will reshape not just Jack's future, but potentially the battle for family farms across the entire region. As Jack's battered pickup led the way into town, Alexander followed in his luxury sedan, two vehicles that couldn't have been more different, just like the men driving them. Yet beneath these visible contrasts lay unexpected parallels and complementary knowledge that would prove more valuable than either yet realized. The faded sign for Mabel's diner came into view, a humble establishment about to become the setting for a pivotal moment in the story of Willow Creek Valley. The evening sun cast long shadows across Main Street as they parked in front of the diner, its windows glowing with warm light against the approaching dusk. Inside those windows, local farmers who had managed to hold on to their land gathered for their usual Thursday coffee. Unaware that the stranger in the expensive suit following Jack Harmon through the door might represent either salvation or just another false hope in their ongoing struggle to preserve a disappearing way of life. The bell above the door jingled as they entered, conversations momentarily pausing as curious eyes turned toward the unlikely pair. The next hour would change everything, not just for Jack Harmon, but for everyone connected to the increasingly desperate battle for the soul and soil of Willow Creek Valley. Mabel's diner was a time capsule of rural America. Vinyl booths worn smooth by decades of use, a counter with swiveling stools, and walls decorated with local high school sports memorabilia and faded photographs of record-breaking harvests from better years. The dinner crowd was sparse, another sign of the community's decline as family farms disappeared and their owners moved away seeking new beginnings. Mabel herself, a sturdy woman in her 60s with hennaed hair and reading glasses, on a chain around her neck, raised her eyebrows at the sight of Jack with a stranger in expensive clothes. In a town where everyone knew everyone, newcomers were instantly noticed and thoroughly evaluated. "Jack Harmon, haven't seen you in weeks," she called out as they entered. "Your usual booth is open." She eyed Alexander with undisguised curiosity, gaze lingering on his clearly expensive watch and the quality of his clothing. In Willow Creek Valley, such obvious markers of wealth usually belong to Meridian executives or bank representatives, neither type welcome in most local establishments. As they settled into a corner booth, Alexander looked around with what seemed like genuine appreciation rather than tourist curiosity. "Places like this are increasingly rare," he commented. "I had a summer job at a diner very similar to this when I was 16. Jack raised an eyebrow, finding it hard to imagine the polished businessman beside him flipping burgers or waiting tables. Alexander caught his skeptical look and laughed. "Hard to picture, I know. But I grew up in a small farming community in Minnesota. My father was a high school agriculture teacher, not a wealthy man. I worked every summer and school break until I left for college." This revelation shifted Jack's perception slightly. What took you from a small town to—" he gestured, "at Alexander's tailored appearance? Cornell University on scholarship, then business school, followed by a series of increasingly corporate positions," Alexander explained. "But I never lost touch with my agricultural roots. They inform everything I do professionally." Mabel arrived, with water and menus, studying Alexander with undisguised curiosity. "You passing through or here on business?" she asked bluntly. "A bit of both," Alexander replied amicably. "My car trouble turned into an unexpected opportunity to see Willow Creek Valley. Beautiful country. Was more beautiful before Meridian. Started swallowing everything," Mabel muttered. "You from one of those investment firms coming to pick over what's left?" "Mabel," Jack admonished gently, though he'd wondered the same thing. "It's a fair question," Alexander said. "No, Mom. I'm not here to buy property or encourage anyone to sell. Quite the opposite, actually." Mabel seemed satisfied with this answer and took their orders, the house special burger for Jack and a grilled chicken salad for Alexander. When she left, Alexander leaned forward, lowering his voice slightly. "Your community has been hit particularly hard by Meridian's expansion. How many independent farms remain in the valley?" 7, Jack answered grimly, "out of 32 just 5 years ago, and most of the remaining ones are on the brink, including mine." "The Johnston place went last month," he continued, pointing through the window toward the eastern hills. "Third-generation farm, nearly 200 acres. Bank foreclosed after Bill couldn't make his equipment loan payments. Meridian bought it at auction for 60 cents on the dollar." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "The pattern is familiar. First, they establish a foothold by purchasing 1 or 2 financially distressed operations. Then they begin actively undermining neighboring farms through various tactics, water rights challenges, introducing pests or contaminants that affect only adjacent properties, manipulating local commodity prices." "You sound like you've studied their playbook," Jack observed, watching Alexander closely. "I have," Alexander confirmed, his expression hardening. "Very thoroughly." Before Jack could ask for clarification, the food arrived. As they ate, Alexander skillfully shifted the conversation, asking about Jack's family history, his innovative farming practices, and his daughter's research. Jack found himself talking more than he had in months, describing Sophie's agricultural science work and his own efforts to maintain sustainable practices despite financial pressures. "Your father implemented rotation patterns that were ahead of his time," Alexander noted, surprising Jack with his specific knowledge. "How would you know that?" Alexander smiled slightly. "Your farm was featured in Progressive Farmer about 20 years ago. Your father's approach to soil conservation, while maintaining yield, was considered revolutionary for its time." Jack vaguely remembered the article. His father had been embarrassed by the attention but proud of the recognition. That Alexander would have read and remembered such an obscure piece of agricultural history seemed unlikely for a typical businessman. "You implemented no-till cultivation and integrated pest management before they became industry buzzwords," Alexander continued. "And your water conservation system is remarkably efficient for an operation without access to the latest technology." "Necessity is the mother of invention," Jack replied with a shrug. "When you can't afford expensive solutions, you get creative." "That kind of practical innovation is invaluable," Alexander said, his tone sincere. "Corporate agriculture tends to throw money and chemicals at problems rather than developing elegant, sustainable solutions." Jack studied the man across from him with growing curiosity. Alexander Grant was clearly educated and wealthy, yet he spoke about agriculture with the passion and knowledge of someone who had personally worked the land. The disconnect was intriguing. "You mentioned your father was an agriculture teacher," Jack said, steering the conversation toward Alexander's background. "Did you ever farm yourself?" "My grandfather had a small dairy operation, nothing like your place, just 40 acres. I spent summers and weekends there as a boy. A genuine warmth entered Alexander's voice. He was old school, believed in knowing every inch of his land, every animal by name, kept handwritten records of rainfall and soil conditions that went back decades. What happened to it? Jack asked, recognizing the past tense in Alexander's description. Conagra subsidiary bought the entire county for soybean production in the late 90s. Not just my grandfather's farm, the whole community. The town where I grew up is essentially a corporate agricultural facility now. Something flickered in Alexander's eyes, an old pain, still resonant. My grandfather didn't live to see it. Heart attack took him the year before. My father said it was a blessing. The revelation created an unexpected bridge between them. Alexander wasn't merely an academic observer of agricultural consolidation. He had experienced it personally. This shared understanding hung between them as they finished their meals, creating a tentative trust neither man had anticipated. As their plates were cleared, Jack decided to press for more clarity. You still haven't told me what you actually do, or why you know so much about Meridian's tactics. Alexander hesitated, seeming to weigh a decision. Finally, he reached for his wallet and extracted a business card, sliding it across the table. This might explain some things. Jack picked up the card. The simple design featured a green leaf logo and the name Alexander Grant, CEO, Teranova Agricultural Solutions. Below that was a tagline, Sustainable Agriculture for Future Generations. Terra. Nova, Jack read aloud, the name vaguely familiar. You're the organic farming conglomerate that's been challenging Meridian's market share in the Midwest. Alexander nodded. We're more than organic farming, though that's part of our approach. Teranova is committed to proving that sustainable. Community-based agriculture can be both environmentally responsible and economically viable. We're building an alternative to the Meridian model. Jack's mind raced as he connected the dots. You're meeting in Cedar Rapids tomorrow, a strategic planning session for our new regional headquarters, Alexander confirmed. We're expanding our presence in this part of the country, directly challenging Meridian's dominance. And you just happened to break down near my farm? Jack couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. Alexander smiled ruefully. The breakdown was genuinely unplanned, but I recognized your name when you introduced yourself. Your reputation in sustainable agriculture circles is significant. I've read articles about your water conservation techniques. Jack blinked in surprise. His innovations had been featured in a few agricultural journals years ago, but he'd assumed no one outside local farming communities had paid attention. So this dinner isn't just gratitude for fixing your car, Jack said slowly. No, Alexander admitted. It's also professional interest. Teranova approaches agriculture differently than Meridian. We don't seek to replace family farms. We partner with them, providing technology, distribution networks, and capital while preserving their autonomy and sustainable practices. Jack had heard similar promises before and remained skeptical. Sounds noble, but ultimately corporations answer to shareholders, not farmers or communities. Instead of becoming defensive, Alexander nodded. A valid concern. That's why Teranova's corporate charter includes legally binding commitments to environmental standards and community preservation. Our shareholders invest precisely because of these values, not despite them. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a folder, placing it on the table. Our partnership model. No pressure to review it now, but it might interest you and your daughter given her scientific background. As Alexander elaborated on Teranova's approach, Jack found his initial suspicion gradually giving way to cautious interest. The company's model, emphasizing regional food systems, soil health, and farmer autonomy, aligned remarkably with his own values. They had successfully established partnerships with family farms in Minnesota and Wisconsin, providing advanced technologies and market access while allowing farmers to retain ownership and decision-making authority. "What exactly are you proposing?" Jack finally asked. "Nothing definitive tonight," Alexander replied carefully. "I'd like to learn more about your operation, share information about our partnership models, and perhaps involve your daughter given her scientific expertise. If there's mutual interest, we could explore a formal relationship." Jack's natural caution reasserted itself. "And my current financial situation? The bank isn't exactly patient. Financial challenges can be addressed through various mechanisms," Alexander said. "But first, I'd want to confirm your daughter's suspicions about soil contamination. If Meridian is engaged in illegal activities to force sales, that changes the entire equation." The conversation was interrupted by Mabel approaching with coffee. "You boys look serious," she observed, filling their cups. "Solving the world's problems?" "Just agriculture's problems," Alexander replied with a smile, "which sometimes feels like the same thing." As Mabel moved away, Alexander lowered his voice. "There's something else you should know. Teranova has been building a case against Meridian's predatory practices for nearly 2 years. We have documented evidence from 3 other agricultural regions showing patterns of contamination and water rights manipulation. Your farm could provide the additional evidence we need for a comprehensive legal challenge." Jack's pulse quickened. "You're planning to sue Meridian?" "More than that," Alexander replied. "With sufficient evidence, this becomes a matter for state and federal regulators, EPA violations, antitrust issues, potentially even criminal charges for executives involved in environmental sabotage." The implications were staggering. Jack had been fighting a lonely battle to save his own farm, never imagining he might be part of a larger effort to challenge the very system threatening family agriculture across the country. As they finished their coffee, Alexander proposed visiting the farm again the following afternoon after his Cedar Rapids meeting. "I'd like to bring our soil science director to take samples that could corroborate your daughter's findings, with your permission, of course." For the first time in months, Jack felt a glimmer of hope, not just for his farm's survival, but for some measure of justice against the corporation that had systematically destroyed his community. Yet caution still tempered his optimism. "Why should I trust you?" he asked bluntly. "Corporate promises don't have a great track record in Willow Creek Valley." Alexander considered this for a moment before answering. "You shouldn't trust me, not immediately. Check Teranova's reputation, call some of our partner farms, talk to your daughter about our environmental record. I'll send you information tonight, and you decide whether it's worth continuing the conversation tomorrow." The transparency of this response, acknowledging rather than dismissing Jack's skepticism, carried more weight than any assurances could have. As they parted outside the diner, Alexander shook Jack's hand firmly. "Thank you again for your help. Today, regardless of what comes next, I'm grateful for the chance meeting." Jack watched the expensive car pull away, the business card still in his hand, feeling as though his life had suddenly veered onto an unexpected path. 24 hours ago, he had been a desperate farmer facing foreclosure alone. Now, he potentially had an ally, a powerful one, in his fight against Meridian. What Jack didn't yet realize was that Alexander Grant's interest in Willow Creek Valley went far beyond business strategy, and the coming confrontation with Meridian would reveal secrets neither man had fully disclosed. The following morning, Jack woke before dawn, a lifetime habit of early rising unchanged by his current circumstances. After checking on his limited livestock, a few dairy cows and chickens kept mostly for family use, he made coffee and opened his laptop at the kitchen table. He'd spent hours the previous night researching Teranova Agricultural Solutions, reading about their operations and partnership models. The company had begun as a small organic seed supplier 15 years ago and had grown into a significant agricultural corporation with a distinctly different approach than industry giants like Meridian. Their commitment to sustainable practices and family farm partnerships seemed genuine, backed by an impressive environmental record and testimonials from partner farmers. At 7:30, his phone rang, Sophie, calling earlier than usual. "Dad, I got your text. Teranova, are you serious?" Her voice was charged with excitement. "They're practically legends in sustainable ag circles. Their soil regeneration program is revolutionary." "So you've heard of them?" Jack said, relieved by her positive reaction. "Heard of them? I applied for an internship with their research division last year. Didn't get it. But wait, how are you suddenly connected with Teranova?" Jack explained his encounter with Alexander Grant, still scarcely believing it himself. Sophie's initial excitement gave way to cautious optimism as she processed the implications. If they're building a case against Meridian's contamination practices, the timing couldn't be better, she said. "I've been documenting the chemical anomalies in our soil samples for months. It's not conclusive yet, but with Terranova's resources and testing capabilities—" "Hold on," Jack cautioned. "We don't know if anything will come of this. Grant might just be fishing for information to use against a competitor. Teranova doesn't operate that way, Dad. Their ethical standards are why I wanted to work for them." Sophie paused. "But you're right to be careful. I can drive out today and be there when he returns." "Don't you have classes?" "My grad assistant can cover. This is more important." After hanging up, Jack walked his property, seeing it through new eyes, not just as his struggling family legacy, but as a potential battleground in a larger war between competing visions of agriculture's future. The contrast between his withered fields and Meridian's lush crops seemed even more stark this morning, the boundary line unnaturally precise. As he approached the eastern property line, something caught his attention. A black SUV with tinted windows parked on the access road that ran along Meridian's side of the boundary. Jack slowed his pace, staying partially concealed behind a stand of old oak trees. Two men in Meridian's typical corporate attire stood beside the vehicle, one holding what appeared to be sampling equipment, while the other consulted a tablet. Jack's instinct was to confront them, demand to know what they were doing so close to his property line. But caution prevailed. If Alexander Grant's suspicions about Meridian's methods were accurate, alerting them to his awareness might only cause them to become more careful, not stop their activities. Instead, he discreetly took photos with his phone, documenting the men, their vehicle, and their equipment. If they were involved in the soil contamination Sophie had detected, this might be valuable evidence. The men finished whatever they were doing, packed their equipment, and drove away without noticing Jack. He immediately called Sophie. "Meridian's people were just at our eastern boundary taking samples," he told her. "Something's definitely going on." "Did they cross onto our property?" Sophie asked sharply. "Not that I saw, but they were right at the line. I took pictures." "Good. Send them to me right away. And Dad, be careful. If they're monitoring soil contaminant levels, they might increase the dosage if readings are dropping." Jack grimaced at the implication. "You really think they'd intentionally poison neighboring land?" "The chemical signatures I've found aren't naturally occurring," Sophie replied grimly. "And they're concentrated in patterns that align perfectly with water runoff from Meridian's property to ours. That's not coincidence." After sending Sophie the photos, Jack returned to the farmhouse to find a sleek black company car with Meridian's logo pulling into his driveway. His stomach tightened. It was Richard Keller, Meridian's regional acquisition manager, a man Jack had come to despise for his smug condescension and thinly veiled threats. Keller emerged from the car looking immaculate as always, in his tailored suit, his smile practiced and insincere. "Jack, good to see you. Beautiful morning, isn't it?" "What do you want, Keller?" Jack asked bluntly, making no effort to hide his hostility. Direct as always, Keller replied, his smile unwavering. I understand the bank has set a deadline on your loan. 30 days, is it? Must be stressful. Jack's jaw tightened. My arrangements with the bank are private. Of course, Keller said smoothly. Though in small communities, information tends to circulate. I'm here because Meridian is prepared to make you a final offer, one that acknowledges your time constraints. He handed Jack a sealed envelope. The terms are generous considering the property's condition, enough to clear your debts and provide a comfortable cushion for your next chapter. Jack didn't open the envelope. Let me guess. It's less than your previous offers. Keller's expression hardened slightly. Market realities, Jack. Your position has weakened considerably since our last discussion. This offer expires in 48 hours. After that, we'll allocate those funds to other acquisitions. And if I refuse, then you'll face foreclosure in 30 days, and Meridian will likely acquire the property from the bank for significantly less than we're offering you now. Keller gestured toward Jack's struggling fields. Look at the reality, Jack. Your crops are failing. Your equipment is outdated. Even if you somehow satisfied the bank this time, you'd be in the same position next season. But the calculated cruelty of the statement, accurate though it might be, fueled Jack's anger. Is that why your people were taking soil samples at my property line this morning, making sure your market realities are progressing on schedule? For a brief moment, surprise flashed across Keller's face before his professional mask returned. I don't know what you're talking about. Our agronomists routinely monitor soil conditions throughout our operations. Right at my property boundary, where my crops start failing while yours thrive. Jack stepped closer. What are you putting in the soil, Keller? What chemicals are mysteriously finding their way onto my land? Keller's smile disappeared entirely. That's a serious accusation, Jack. One that a man in your financial position shouldn't make lightly. Defamation lawsuits are expensive. So is violating EPA regulations and tampering with neighboring properties, Jack countered. I wonder what state environmental officials would find if they tested the runoff patterns between our properties. Something calculating entered Keller's eyes. Environmental investigations take time, Jack. More time than you have before the bank forecloses. He straightened his tie. Consider the offer. It's the best outcome available to you now. As Keller turned to leave, he added casually, By the way, I noticed an expensive car at your workshop yesterday. German, wasn't it? Visiting potential buyers already? Smart move, though I doubt anyone would match our offer. The comment confirmed Jack's suspicion that Meridian monitored his property regularly. Just a traveler with car trouble, he replied. Keller nodded, clearly not believing him. Well, if you're entertaining other offers, remember that Meridian has certain advantages in this region. The regulatory environment, water rights, transportation infrastructure, all favor large-scale operations. With established relationships, the threat was thinly veiled. Any potential buyer would face the same systematic obstacles that had driven Jack to the brink of bankruptcy. 48 hours, Jack, Keller reminded him as he climbed back into his car. After that, events will take their natural course. Jack watched the Meridian vehicle disappear down his driveway, the sealed envelope heavy in his hand. Despite his defiant words, the reality of his situation remained dire. Even with Alexander Grant's interest, there was no guarantee that Teranova could or would intervene in time to save his farm from foreclosure. Out of curiosity, he finally opened the envelope. The offer was indeed lower than Meridian's previous proposals, barely enough to cover his debts, with almost nothing left for a fresh start elsewhere. It was an insulting proposal designed to exploit his desperation, yet still marginally better than losing everything to foreclosure. Jack's phone chimed with an incoming text message. It was from an unknown number. Mr. Harmon, this is Alexander. Grant, meeting in Cedar Rapids concluded early. We'll be in your area by 2 p.m. with our soil science director, Dr. Elaine Chen. Would this time work to continue our conversation? We have portable testing equipment that might provide immediate insights into your soil composition issues. The timing was uncanny, almost as if the universe was presenting him with a clear choice between Meridian's exploitative offer and Teranova's uncertain promise. Jack texted back confirming the appointment, then called Sophie to update her on both Keller's visit and Alexander's imminent return. "I'll be there by 1:30, Sophie promised. "Don't let Meridian intimidate you, Dad. If they're making threats, even veiled ones, it means they're worried." "Worried about what?" "I'm a single farmer weeks away from foreclosure." "Maybe they know something we don't," Sophie suggested. "Or they're concerned about what Alexander Grant might discover. Either way, their urgency is telling." After hanging up, Jack found himself staring at Meridian's offer letter again. For a fleeting moment, he considered the simplicity of acceptance, signing the papers, paying off his debts, walking away from the increasingly bitter struggle. It would be the practical choice, the sensible surrender to overwhelming forces. But then he looked out across his fields, remembering his grandfather breaking the soil for the first time, his father teaching him to recognize the moment when seed became seedling, Emma's joy when their first harvest exceeded expectations. This land held more than monetary value. It contained his family's history, their collective knowledge, their connection to something enduring in a world of increasing disposability. Whatever game Meridian was playing, whatever secrets they were hiding, Jack couldn't surrender without at least understanding the full truth of what was happening in Willow Creek Valley. If Alexander Grant and Teranova could help reveal that truth, he owed it to himself and every farmer who had already lost everything to hear them out. Jack placed Meridian's offer on the kitchen table and walked outside to prepare for his visitors. The morning's clear sky had given way to gathering clouds, a metaphorical reflection of the forces converging on his small farm. By nightfall, he would need to make decisions that would determine not just his own future, but potentially the future of agriculture in the entire valley. What he couldn't possibly know was that Richard Keller was already making a very different kind of preparation, one that would transform the simmering conflict into something far more dangerous than a simple corporate land acquisition. Sophie arrived first, her university-issued sedan kicking up dust as it raced down the driveway. She emerged looking every bit the scientist, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, clipboard in hand, wearing jeans and a soil conservation program t-shirt. At 30, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had found her purpose, the perfect blend of Jack's practicality and her mother's intellectual curiosity. "I brought everything from the lab," she announced, opening her trunk to reveal collection containers, testing equipment and a laptop. "Plus all my previous data for comparison. I've been documenting the anomalies for months, but I never had the resources to run comprehensive toxicology screenings." Jack helped her unload. "You really think we can prove Meridian's been contaminating our soil with Teranova's resources?" "Absolutely." Sophie's eyes gleamed with determination. "Their mobile testing capabilities are beyond anything I have access to at the university. If there's evidence to find, Dr. Chen will find it." They had just finished setting up a temporary workstation in the kitchen when the sound of approaching vehicles drew their attention. Alexander's now repaired luxury car led the way, followed by a Teranova company SUV with equipment racks visible on its roof. Jack and Sophie waited on the porch as Alexander emerged, now dressed more practically in khakis and a button-down, a shirt rather than yesterday's suit. From the SUV stepped a woman in her mid-40s with short, practical hair and the focused expression of someone who viewed the world as a series of problems awaiting scientific solutions. Jack, good to see you again, Alexander said warmly, extending his hand. This is Dr. Elaine Chen, Teranova's Director of Soil Science and Environmental Research. Elaine, meet Jack Harmon and his daughter Sophie. Dr. Chen shook their hands with a firm grip. Mr. Harmon, I've read your daughter's preliminary findings, very thorough work. You've documented a fascinating pattern of soil degradation that's consistent with cases we've investigated in other regions. Sophie straightened, clearly pleased by the professional recognition. Thank you, Dr. Chen. I've followed your research on microbiome disruption in agricultural soils. Your paper on detecting synthetic growth inhibitors was groundbreaking. As the scientists immediately launched into technical discussion, Alexander turned to Jack. I see they're going to get along just fine. While they set up, I'd like to show you something. He led Jack to his car and retrieved a tablet. These are satellite images of Willow Creek Valley, taken at 6-month intervals over the past 3 years. Watch what happens. The screen displayed a time-lapse sequence showing the gradual transformation of the valley's patchwork of diverse family farms into Meridian's uniform corporate fields. What struck Jack most was the visible pattern of crop failure that preceded each acquisition, a spreading deterioration that matched exactly what was happening to his own land. You see it? Alexander asked quietly. It's not random. The pattern of crop failure always begins at the boundaries with Meridian properties and spreads inward. Once the farm fails and Meridian acquires it, the land recovers completely within 2 growing seasons. Jack stared at the evidence, anger building inside him. They've been doing this systematically, to everyone. Yes, and they're getting better at it, more targeted. The compounds they're using now break down quickly after, serving their purpose, making them harder to detect unless you know exactly what you're looking for. Alexander swiped to a new image. Your farm is one of the last independent operations in the valley. From Meridian's perspective, it's a critical acquisition. Because of the water rights, Jack said, connecting the dots. My property controls access to the aquifer that feeds the eastern half of the valley. Alexander nodded. And the soil composition is perfect for their proprietary seed varieties. Plus your farm sits at the junction of 2 county roads, ideal for their transportation logistics. Jack's jaw tightened. So I'm not just fighting to save my family's legacy. I'm the last obstacle to Meridian controlling the entire valley's agricultural infrastructure. Precisely, Alexander confirmed, which is why they'll fight harder to acquire your property than they did for the others. They returned to the house to find Sophie and Dr. Chen already at work, setting up sophisticated portable testing equipment. On the kitchen table, 2 Teranova technicians had emerged from the SUV and were preparing field sampling kits. We'll need to take samples from multiple locations, Dr. Chen explained, laying out a grid map of the property. Particularly along the boundaries with Meridian's land, but also from your well and irrigation system. I've marked the areas where crop failure first appeared, Sophie added, pointing to several spots on the map. And these are the drainage patterns that connect to Meridian's property. Jack noticed that Alexander was studying the Meridian offer letter he'd left on the table. They've moved up their timeline, Alexander observed. 48 hours is unusually aggressive, even for Meridian. They saw your car here yesterday, Jack explained. Keller mentioned it specifically. Alexander's expression turned grim. Then they're worried about what we might find. We should move quickly. He turned to Dr. Chen. How soon can you have preliminary results? With the portable spectrometer, we can have basic chemical profiles within hours, she replied. More detailed analysis will require sending samples to our main lab, but we should be able to identify any obvious contaminants today. For the next 2 hours, the farm became a hive of scientific activity. Jack and Alexander assisted as Sophie and Dr. Chen collected samples from various locations, carefully documenting each site with photographs and GPS coordinates. The Teranova technicians deployed sophisticated sensing equipment along the property boundaries, focusing particularly on the sections adjacent to Meridian's land. As they worked near the eastern boundary, one of the technicians called Dr. Chen over with evident concern. She examined his readings, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "This can't be right," she muttered, recalibrating the equipment and taking new readings. "The concentration is too high to be accidental." Sophie leaned over to examine the data. "What are you seeing?" "Synthetic growth inhibitors, specifically a compound called ZX-27, developed for military applications to rapidly clear vegetation from combat zones." Dr. Chen's voice was tight with professional outrage. "It's not approved for agricultural use in the United States, or anywhere for that matter. It's classified as an environmental hazard." Jack felt a chill despite the afternoon. Heat, military applications. How would Meridian even get access to something like that? Alexander's expression darkened. Meridian's parent company has defense contracts. They've been diversifying beyond agriculture for years, moving into areas like environmental security and territorial management, euphemisms for military support operations. "The concentration is highest here," Dr. Chen continued, indicating an area where a natural drainage channel crossed from Meridian's property onto Jack's land. "It's being deliberately introduced through the water flow, not just leaching or accidental runoff." Sophie was examining soil samples under a portable microscope. The soil structure is completely disrupted. The beneficial fungi and bacteria have been virtually eradicated. "This is why our crops won't grow. The soil microbiome has been deliberately destroyed." The scientific confirmation of what Jack had suspected transformed his anger from a smoldering ember to a burning flame. "They've been poisoning my land, destroying everything my family built over 4 generations. And they've been doing it systematically across the entire region," Alexander added. "This evidence, combined with what we've gathered from other affected areas, is enough to trigger federal investigations under multiple environmental protection statutes." Dr. Chen was already packaging samples for more detailed laboratory analysis. "I'll need to document the chain of custody meticulously. If this goes to court..." She was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching, not from the driveway, but along the back access road that bordered Meridian's property. 3 black SUVs with Meridian logos rolled to a stop at the property line, and several men in suits emerged, including Richard Keller. "Looks like our activity has been noticed," Alexander said grimly. "Jack, let Dr. Chen and the technicians continue their work. Sophie should document everything. You and I will handle Keller." As they walked toward the property boundary, Jack felt a strange calm replace his earlier anger. For months, he had been fighting a seemingly losing battle against invisible forces conspiring to take his land. Now, with the enemy in plain sight and scientific evidence confirming his suspicions, the path forward was suddenly clear. Keller crossed onto Jack's property, flanked by 2 men whose builds and alertness suggested security backgrounds rather than agricultural expertise. "Jack, I'm disappointed," Keller called out, his voice carrying false concern. "When you mentioned environmental testing earlier, I assumed it was just talk. Bringing in outside consultants seems rather dramatic." "Not consultants," Jack replied flatly. "Partners. Teranova Agricultural Solutions is very interested in what's been happening to my land, and to the other farms Meridian has acquired under suspicious circumstances." For the first time, Keller's confident facade cracked slightly as his gaze shifted to Alexander. "Mr. Grant, this is unexpected. Terranova's interest in a failing farm seems questionable from a business perspective. Our interest in illegal environmental contamination is quite substantial, however," Alexander replied, his voice hardening. As is the EPA's, I imagine, once they review Dr. Chen's findings about the military-grade growth inhibitors being channeled onto this property. Keller's expression froze, then reset to professional neutrality. I'm not familiar with any such substances. If there are contaminants on Mr. Harmon's property, perhaps he should look to his own farming practices. Meridian adheres strictly to all environmental regulations. ZX-27 isn't just unregulated for agricultural use, Mr. Keller. It's prohibited, Alexander said. Its presence in a pattern that originates exclusively from Meridian property and follows water runoff patterns is going to be difficult to explain as coincidence. One of Keller's security men whispered something in his ear, causing his expression to darken. I see Teranova has decided to engage in corporate espionage. These unfounded accusations are clearly an attempt to interfere with Meridian's legitimate business operations. The soil samples and chemical analysis will speak for themselves, Jack interjected, as will the satellite imagery, showing the same pattern of targeted crop failure preceding every farm acquisition in the valley. Keller's face flushed with anger. You're making a mistake, Jack. A very expensive mistake. Our offer was generous, considering your circumstances. Now, he gestured vaguely, the threat implicit. Your offer is withdrawn? Jack asked, surprising himself with his calm. Good, because I'm not selling to Meridian. Not now, not ever. And neither will anyone else once the truth about your tactics becomes public. This property will be ours, one way or another, Keller snapped, abandoning all pretense of civility. When the bank forecloses, there won't be a foreclosure. Alexander interrupted. Teranova is prepared to enter into an immediate partnership agreement with Mr. Harmon that will resolve his financial obligations and initiate a soil remediation program to reverse the damage caused by your company's illegal activities. Jack turned to Alexander in surprise. This was moving faster than he had anticipated. Alexander gave him a slight nod of confirmation. Keller's face contorted with barely contained rage. This isn't over. Teranova isn't the only company with connections and resources. Your interference will be addressed at the appropriate level. Is that a threat, Mr. Keller? Alexander asked mildly. Because it sounds remarkably like one, and I'd remind you that this conversation is being recorded as part of our environmental documentation process. He gestured toward Sophie, who was, indeed, filming the encounter from a discreet distance. Keller visibly struggled to regain his composure. Meridian will vigorously defend its reputation against defamatory claims. Our legal team will be in touch. He turned and stalked back to his vehicle, his security personnel following closely. As the Meridian SUVs pulled away, Jack turned to Alexander. Did you mean that about the partnership agreement? Every word, Alexander confirmed. I was planning to propose it after we completed the testing, but Keller's appearance forced my hand. Teranova is prepared to enter into an immediate agreement that will clear your bank debt, provide capital for soil remediation, and establish your farm as our regional showcase for sustainable family farm partnerships. The offer was almost too perfect, the solution to all of Jack's problems handed to him in the midst of crisis. His natural caution reasserted itself. Why would Teranova make that kind of investment in a contaminated property facing foreclosure? Alexander's expression was understanding rather than offended by the question. 3 reasons. First, the strategic location of your farm makes it ideal for our regional operations. Second, your reputation for innovation in sustainable farming aligns perfectly with our corporate mission, but most importantly, he paused, something personal entering his voice. Stopping Meridian from destroying another farming community like they did to my hometown is worth the investment. The sincerity in Alexander's explanation resonated with Jack's own values. This wasn't just a business transaction, it was a partnership based on shared principles and a common enemy. "We should continue this conversation inside," Alexander suggested, glancing at the darkening sky as storm clouds gathered. "Dr. Chen will want to finish her sample collection before the rain starts, and we have partnership details to discuss." As they walked back toward the farmhouse, Jack felt as though a weight had lifted from his shoulders. The path ahead was still, uncertain, but for the first time in years, it contained genuine hope rather than the grim determination to delay the inevitable. What neither man realized yet was that Richard Keller's parting threat wasn't merely corporate posturing. Meridian's investment in Willow Creek Valley went far beyond agricultural profits, and they wouldn't surrender their plans without deploying every weapon in their considerable arsenal, including some that even Alexander Grant hadn't anticipated. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Jack, Alexander, Sophie, and Dr. Chen gathered around the kitchen table. Outside, the Teranova technicians hurried to complete their sample collection before the approaching storm arrived. The atmosphere inside mirrored the building tension of the weather, a sense of forces gathering, of inevitable confrontation. Approaching, Dr. Chen spread out preliminary test results on the table, her expression grave. "The contamination is worse than I initially thought. We've identified not just ZX-27, but at least 3 other synthetic growth inhibitors, all military grade, all prohibited for agricultural use. The concentration increases at each drainage point from Meridian's property." "How long would it take to remediate?" Jack asked, trying to process the scientific confirmation of what he'd suspected for months. "With standard techniques?" "Years," Dr. Chen replied frankly. "But Teranova has developed accelerated bioremediation methods using specialized fungi and bacterial cultures. We could potentially restore basic soil health within 1 growing season, though full recovery would take longer." Alexander nodded. "We've successfully rehabilitated similarly damaged soils in Wisconsin and Minnesota. The technology is expensive but effective." He turned to Jack. "Which brings us to the partnership proposal I mentioned." He opened his briefcase and removed a folder containing legal documents. "This is our standard family farm partnership agreement, adapted for your specific situation. The key points: Teranova will immediately clear your bank debt, provide capital for soil remediation, and establish joint operational protocols that maintain your ownership and decision-making authority while integrating your farm into our sustainable agriculture network." Jack looked at the papers with careful scrutiny. "And what does Teranova get in return?" "First access to your crops at guaranteed fair market rates. Your participation in our research programs for sustainable farming practices. And most importantly, a showcase property demonstrating how family farms can thrive using our partnership model." Alexander pointed to specific sections of the agreement. "You'll notice there's no land transfer, no loss of autonomy, and a mandatory 10-year commitment from both parties." As Jack reviewed the documents, Sophie and Dr. Chen continued analyzing the test results. "The contamination pattern is deliberate," Sophie observed. "Look at these concentration gradients. They follow our crop rotation patterns exactly. Someone provided Meridian with detailed information about our planting schedule." Jack looked up sharply. "The bank, loan officers require updated farm management plans every year. Meridian must have access to that information somehow." "Industrial espionage is standard practice for them," Alexander confirmed. "They've been caught bribing bank employees in other regions to gain access to farmers' financial and operational data." The kitchen fell silent as the implications sank in. The corruption wasn't just at Meridian. It had infected the very institutions that rural communities relied upon: banks, agricultural offices, perhaps even local government. "I need to make a call," Alexander said suddenly. stepping outside onto the porch despite the first heavy raindrops beginning to fall. Jack continued reviewing the partnership agreement, finding to his surprise that it matched everything Alexander had claimed: fair terms, preserved autonomy, and substantial financial support. It seemed almost too good to be true, which awakened his natural farmer's caution. "What do you think?" he asked Sophie, who had been reading over his shoulder. She pointed to specific clauses. "The soil remediation commitments are solid. The price, guarantees, are actually better than current market rates. And this Sustainability Research Fund would provide ongoing support for the innovative practices you've been developing." She met his eyes. "It's legitimate, Dad. This could save the farm." Before Jack could respond, Alexander returned, his expression tense. "We may have a problem. My security team has detected unusual activity on Meridian's corporate network. Large data transfers involving files labeled Willow Creek Acquisition and Protocol 7. "What's Protocol 7? Jack asked. "Unknown, but in previous regions where we've confronted Meridian, they've employed various tactics when legal acquisition fails. Their protocols range from regulatory harassment to more direct methods of pressure." As if to punctuate his statement, headlights appeared at the end of the long driveway, multiple vehicles approaching through the intensifying rain. "Are you expecting anyone?" Alexander asked sharply. Jack shook his head. No one would come out in this weather. Dr. Chen had moved to the window. 3 vehicles, black SUVs like the ones Keller arrived in earlier. Alexander's phone chimed with an incoming message. He read it quickly, his face hardening. "My team just intercepted internal communications. Meridian is implementing evidence recovery procedures at this location immediately." He looked up grimly. "They're coming for the samples and test results. We need to secure everything now." The kitchen erupted into controlled chaos. Dr. Chen and Sophie quickly packed the soil samples and testing equipment, while Alexander made rapid calls to what sounded like legal and security contacts. Jack grabbed his shotgun from the cabinet, not with any intention of using it, but as a precautionary measure on an isolated farm about to be visited by unwelcome corporate agents. "Jack," Alexander said urgently, "we need to get Dr. Chen's evidence off the property. If they seize those samples, we lose our leverage." He pulled out his keys. "My car has diplomatic-style protection through a security contract. If we can get the samples to it—" "They'll be watching your vehicle," Jack interrupted, "but I know this land better than anyone. There's a back way out through the north pasture, rough terrain, but passable in your company SUV if your driver knows what they're doing." The approaching vehicles had reached the halfway point of the long driveway, moving slowly in the worsening weather. "Dr. Chen, you and the technicians take the samples and equipment through the north pasture route," Alexander directed. "Contact our legal team the moment you're clear. Sophie, you should go with them." "I'm staying with my father," Sophie replied firmly. "And I'm staying with my farm," Jack added. "If Meridian wants a confrontation, they'll get one. On my property. On my terms." Alexander studied both Harmons for a moment, then nodded. "I'll stay too. 3 witnesses are better than 1. Dr. Chen and the technicians quickly loaded the critical samples and equipment into the Teranova SUV and slipped out the back door. Jack gave them hasty directions to the seldom-used northern access road as the approaching vehicles drew closer. "To the house. What's the plan?" Sophie asked, as the Teranova SUV disappeared into the rainy darkness. "We stall them," Alexander replied. "Keep them occupied while Dr. Chen gets the evidence to safety. Once it's secured, Meridian's position weakens considerably." "And if they try to force their way in? Search the property?" Jack's hand tightened. "On his shotgun. They have no legal authority for that," Alexander assured him. "No matter what they claim, this is private property. Any unauthorized entry constitutes trespassing." The approaching vehicles stopped in front of the farmhouse, headlights illuminating the rain in bright cones. Doors opened, and several figures emerged, more than had accompanied Keller earlier. To Jack's surprise, he recognized not just Meridian security personnel, but also two men in sheriff's deputy uniforms. Law enforcement, Jack muttered. That's unexpected. And concerning, Alexander added. Stay calm. Remember, we've done nothing wrong. A sharp knock rattled the front door. Jack moved to answer it, shotgun visibly present but pointed safely downward. Sophie and Alexander positioned themselves behind him, presenting a united front. Jack opened the door to find Richard Keller standing on his porch, flanked by the two deputies and four men in Meridian security windbreakers. Keller's smile held triumphant malice. Mr. Harmon, he said smoothly, I'm afraid we have a serious situation that requires immediate attention. These officers have a warrant to search these premises for evidence of industrial espionage and theft of proprietary agricultural compounds. One of the deputies, a young man Jack didn't recognize, concerning in a county where he knew most residents, held up an official-looking document. We need to come in, sir. Please put down the firearm. Jack didn't move. May I see that warrant? Deputy handed it over, and Jack examined it carefully before passing it to Alexander, who studied it with the practiced eye of someone familiar with legal documents. This warrant is extremely limited in scope, Alexander noted, looking up at the officers. It only authorizes search for documents and digital materials related to Meridian proprietary seed formulations, not general soil samples or testing equipment. Nevertheless, we need to conduct a thorough search, Keller insisted. Jack stood his ground in the doorway. You can search for exactly what the warrant specifies, nothing more. And I'll remind you that Teranova's presence here is at my invitation as potential business partners. Any materials they've collected are at my request and with my permission as the property owner. The older deputy, whom Jack recognized as Deputy Collins, shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Harmon, it would be better if you cooperated fully. Mr. Keller has made serious allegations about corporate espionage. I'm sure he has, Jack replied evenly. But I find the timing suspicious, given that Teranova's scientists have just documented evidence of illegal chemical contamination originating from Meridian's property. Deputy Collins's eyebrows rose. Contamination. What kind of contamination? Before Jack could answer, Keller interrupted sharply. That's completely unfounded. Mr. Harmon is attempting to distract from the serious legal issues at hand. We have reason to believe that Teranova representatives have collected soil and crop samples containing Meridian's proprietary biological materials, constituting theft of intellectual property. Actually, Alexander interjected, the only materials we've collected are samples of prohibited military-grade growth inhibitors that have mysteriously migrated from Meridian property onto Mr. Harmon's land, causing systematic crop failure. Materials that Meridian should not possess, let alone be introducing into the local ecosystem. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Deputy Collins' face. Military-grade what now? This is exactly the kind of defamatory claim we anticipated, Keller said quickly, which is why the warrant was necessary. We need to prevent Teranova from fabricating evidence against Meridian while stealing our proprietary research. No one's fabricating anything. Sophie stepped forward, tablet in hand. I'm Dr. Sophie Harmon from the State Agricultural Research Division. I've been documenting unusual chemical signatures in our soil for months. The samples collected today merely confirmed what we already suspected: deliberate contamination of our property through water runoff from Meridian's land. Deputy Collins looked increasingly uncomfortable, while the younger deputy remained impassive. Mr. Keller didn't mention any of this when requesting the warrant. I'm shocked, Alexander commented dryly. Keller's face flushed with barely contained anger. Enough delays. Execute the warrant, officers. Search the property for the stolen materials. You can search for what's specified in the warrant, Jack reiterated, stepping aside to allow entry but maintaining his composed demeanor. Nothing more. As the deputies entered, followed closely by Meridian's security personnel, Jack noticed Keller scanning the room, clearly looking for the testing, equipment and samples that were no longer present. His expression darkened when he realized they were gone. "Where are the Teranova scientists?" he demanded, "and the materials they collected?" "Dr. Chen had a prior commitment," Alexander replied smoothly. "As did our technical staff." "With our soil samples," Keller accused. "Deputies, Teranova representatives have removed evidence from this property despite knowing a search warrant was being executed." "The warrant wasn't being executed when they left," Sophie pointed out. "And as my father said, those samples were collected with his permission from his property. They're not mentioned in your warrant." The younger deputy moved toward the kitchen table, where some of Dr. Chen's preliminary notes remained. "Are these related to the testing?" "Those are my personal research notes," Sophie said quickly. "Protected intellectual property of the State Agricultural Research Division." Alexander stepped forward. "Deputy, before you proceed further, I should inform you that I've already contacted Teranova's legal department. They're on standby for an emergency injunction against this warrant, based on its suspicious timing and limited scope. They're also preparing formal complaints to the State Attorney General regarding Meridian's possession and environmental release of prohibited chemical compounds." The confident authority in Alexander's voice gave the deputies pause. Deputy Collins pulled his younger colleague aside for a whispered consultation, clearly reconsidering the situation. Keller, meanwhile, was growing visibly agitated. "This is obstruction. All materials collected from this property today must be surrendered immediately." "Mr. Keller," Alexander responded calmly, "I understand your concern. Meridian stands to face significant legal liability if evidence of your systematic soil contamination becomes public. But intimidation tactics and questionable warrants won't make that evidence disappear. It's already being processed at secure facilities beyond your reach." The statement was a calculated risk. Dr. Chen had only left minutes ago and was likely still making her way through the difficult terrain of the North Pasture. But Keller didn't know that. A tense standoff ensued in Jack's living room. Meridian's representatives growing increasingly frustrated, while the deputies became visibly uncomfortable with the situation. Outside, the storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows as thunder rolled overhead. Jack's phone vibrated in his pocket. He checked it discreetly. A text from an unknown number, presumably one of the Teranova technicians. "Clear of improperty, samples secure, legal team activated." He caught Alexander's eye and gave a subtle nod. Alexander's posture relaxed slightly, though his vigilant expression remained unchanged. "Deputies," Alexander said, "I believe we can resolve this situation professionally. Teranova will fully comply with any properly executed legal procedures. But this warrant's limited scope doesn't cover the materials Mr. Keller is actually seeking. I suggest you complete your authorized search, and we can address broader concerns through the appropriate legal channels." Deputy Collins seemed relieved by this reasonable approach. "That sounds sensible. We'll complete our search according to the warrant's specifications." Keller stepped closer to the deputy, his voice low but intense. "You're not understanding the situation. Those soil samples need to be recovered immediately." "That's not covered in the warrant, sir," Deputy Collins replied, his professional demeanor reasserting itself. "We can only search for what's specifically authorized." As the deputies began their limited search, Keller pulled out his phone and stepped onto the porch, making a call with urgent, angry gestures. Jack, Sophie, and Alexander exchanged glances, knowing that Meridian was likely escalating to whatever Protocol 7 entailed. The next 24 hours would determine not just the fate of Harmon farms, but potentially the future of agriculture. In Willow Creek Valley and beyond, the evidence was secured, but the real battle was just beginning. The following morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having passed in the night, leaving puddles that reflected the blue sky and raindrops that sparkled on the withered crops. Jack stood on his porch, coffee in hand, surveying his property with new eyes. Despite the visible damage to his fields, hope had replaced desperation. The deputies had completed their perfunctory search the previous evening, finding nothing that matched their warrant's limited scope. Keller and his Meridian security team had departed with barely concealed fury. Keller's parting words, "This isn't over, Harmon," hanging in the air like a promise. Alexander had spent the night in Jack's guest room, his security team parked discreetly at the end of the driveway. Sophie had taken her old bedroom, the family briefly reunited by crisis. Teranova's legal team had worked through the night, preparing for what they all knew would be Meridian's counterattack. "Any word from Dr. Chen?" Jack asked as Alexander joined him on the porch with his own coffee. "The samples reached our laboratory in Minneapolis at 3 a.m., Alexander confirmed. "Preliminary analysis confirms everything we suspected and worse. They've already filed initial reports with the EPA and state environmental agencies." Jack nodded, feeling vindicated yet still cautious. "How will Meridian respond?" "Denial first, then legal obstruction. They'll claim the contamination is from natural causes or originated from your own farming practices." Alexander sipped his coffee. "But they know they're vulnerable. The evidence is too clear, and the pattern across multiple properties too consistent. What happens now?" Before Alexander could answer, Sophie emerged from the house, phone in hand, her expression a mix of excitement and disbelief. "You're not going to believe this. Professor Whitaker, my colleague who lost his funding after questioning similar soil anomalies, just called. Someone anonymously delivered a hard drive to his office containing internal Meridian documents. Years of them, including detailed plans for what they call acquisition preparation protocols." Alexander straightened. "Acquisition preparation protocols? Systematic methods for forcing targeted farms into financial distress," Sophie explained, scrolling through the message on her phone, "including specific chemical formulations designed to disrupt soil biology on neighboring properties while leaving no traceable evidence." Whitaker says the documents explicitly name Willow Creek Valley as a test region for their most advanced techniques. "A whistleblower," Alexander breathed. "That changes everything." Jack considered this development. Those protocols, they're company-wide, not just Keller going rogue? "Corporate-approved strategy," Sophie confirmed grimly, "with sign-off from executives at the highest level." Whitaker says there are budget authorizations, research and development reports, even success metrics tracking how quickly targeted farms fail after implementation. Alexander was already making calls, relaying the new information to Teranova's legal team. Jack sat down heavily on the porch steps, the magnitude of the revelation sinking in. This wasn't just about his farm anymore. It was about a systematic, corporate strategy to destroy family farming through illegal and immoral means. "Whitaker's taking the documents to the State Attorney General's office this morning," Sophie added, "and copies to the EPA and FBI. He says there's evidence of similar operations in 7 states. By mid-morning, the farm had transformed into an impromptu command center. Teranova representatives arrived with additional security personnel, legal advisors, and environmental experts. News vans from regional stations appeared at the end of the driveway, held back only by Teranova's security team. Jack's phone rang continuously. Calls from neighboring farmers who had sold to Meridian, agricultural officials, even old friends who had left farming years ago. Word was spreading rapidly through the tight-knit agricultural community. Around noon, another unexpected visitor arrived. Sheriff Davis herself, not deputies this time. She approached the house alone, her expression grave but determined. "Mr. Harmon," she greeted Jack formally, "I need to speak with you regarding the warrant executed yesterday evening." Jack invited her inside, where Alexander and Sophie were working with the Teranova team. The sheriff took in the scene, with a professional's assessing gaze. "I've received concerning information about the circumstances surrounding that warrant," she began without preamble. "Deputy Willis has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation of his relationship with Meridian Agriculture Industries. It appears he may have circumvented proper procedures to expedite the warrant request." "We suspected as much," Alexander commented. Sheriff Davis turned to him. "Mr. Grant, I presume your company's legal department has been quite persistent this morning." She returned her attention to Jack. "Mr. Harmon, I want to assure you that my department takes allegations of corporate interference very seriously. If Meridian has been engaging in illegal activities in my county, they will be held accountable. We have evidence they've been deliberately contaminating neighboring properties to force sales," Sophie said, "including prohibited military-grade chemicals." The sheriff's expression hardened. "I've already spoken with state environmental officials, who are en route to collect their own samples. In the meantime, I've stationed deputies at your property boundaries to ensure no one interferes with potential evidence." This support from local law enforcement marked a significant shift. Jack thanked the sheriff, who promised to return after consulting with state investigators. As she left, Alexander received a call that made him step outside for privacy. When he returned, his expression was both grim and satisfied. "Meridian's stock has dropped 12% since markets opened," he announced. "Word of the Whistleblower documents is spreading through financial circles. Their board has called an emergency meeting." By late afternoon, the situation had escalated beyond anything Jack could have imagined. State environmental officials in hazmat suits were taking samples along his eastern boundary. News helicopters circled overhead, capturing footage of the investigation. Social media was erupting with similar stories from farmers across multiple states, all sharing experiences of mysterious crop failures preceding Meridian's acquisition offers. "It's becoming a national story," Alexander observed, showing Jack headlines appearing on major news websites. "Agricultural giant accused of environmental sabotage, and whistleblower exposes corporate plot against family farms." Around 4 p.m., Jack's phone rang with a local number he didn't recognize. When he answered, the voice on the other end was unexpected. "Jack, it's Bernard Wilson from First State Bank." The man sounded nervous, his normally confident banker's tone replaced with uncertainty. "I'm calling about your loan situation." Jack braced himself. "What about it?" "There's been a development. Your loan has been, well, it's been purchased by another entity. All proceedings related to potential foreclosure have been halted pending further review." "Purchased by whom?" Jack asked, though he already suspected. "The answer: Teranova Agricultural Finance," Wilson replied. "They've acquired your note along with loans for several other properties in the valley. I've been instructed to inform you that all payment deadlines are suspended for 90 days, while terms are reassessed." After thanking the banker and ending the call, Jack turned to Alexander. "You bought my loan. When did you manage that?" "This morning," Alexander admitted, "along with loans for the 6 other remaining independent farms in the valley. It's part of Teranova's standard approach when confronting predatory acquisition tactics. We secure the farmer's financial position first, then address the environmental and legal issues." Jack wasn't entirely comfortable with this development, despite its obvious benefit to his situation. "So, you own my debt now?" "Temporarily," Alexander clarified. "The partnership agreement includes loan forgiveness in exchange for equity participation in Teranova's regional cooperative. No debt, no interest payments, just a commitment to sustainable practices and profit sharing. You'll actually own more, not less. Before Jack could fully process this, Sophie rushed in from outside. "Dad, you need to see this. Meridian's making a statement." They gathered around a laptop where a live stream showed Richard Keller standing before reporters outside Meridian's regional headquarters. His normal confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a stiff corporate persona. Meridian Agriculture Industries takes allegations of improper conduct extremely seriously, he was saying, reading from a prepared statement. In light of recent claims regarding our land acquisition practices, the board has authorized a comprehensive internal investigation. During this process, certain executives, including myself, will be taking administrative leave to ensure full transparency. "He's being sacrificed," Alexander observed. "The company's trying to contain the damage by blaming a few individuals rather than acknowledging systemic practices." Keller continued, sweat visible on his forehead despite the cool day. "Meridian remains committed to supporting American agriculture and will cooperate fully with any governmental inquiries. We categorically deny any deliberate contamination of neighboring properties and are confident that a thorough investigation will exonerate our company of these serious but unfounded allegations." As the statement concluded, and Keller faced a barrage of hostile questions from reporters, Jack turned away from the screen. The public denials meant little compared to the reality he had experienced, and the evidence now being analyzed in multiple laboratories. 3 years later, Jack Harmon stood at the edge of his eastern field, now lush with healthy crops stretching toward the horizon. Where once a stark boundary had marked the contrast between his struggling farm and Meridian's corporate operation, now a seamless tapestry of diverse agriculture extended across the valley. The transformation wasn't just visible in the landscape, but in the renewed vitality of the community itself. Willow Creek Valley had become a national model for agricultural restoration and sustainable farming partnerships. Jack's farm, once on the brink of foreclosure, now served as Teranova's regional showcase, a living demonstration of how traditional farming wisdom combined with cutting-edge science could create something greater than either could achieve. Alone, many of the families who had sold to Meridian under duress had returned, their properties reacquired through a complex legal settlement that followed Meridian's eventual guilty plea to environmental violations. The corporation had been forced to divest its holdings in the valley as part of a court-ordered remediation program, creating the opportunity for healing not just the land, but the community. Sophie had left her university position to become Teranova's regional research director, establishing a soil health laboratory that attracted scientists from around the world to study their revolutionary bioremediation techniques. The withered fields had been reborn through the carefully orchestrated introduction of specialized fungi, bacteria, and cover crops that had not merely removed contamination, but had created soil health surpassing pre-contamination levels. As Jack watched a group of agricultural students touring a demonstration plot where Sophie was explaining their integrated pest management system, he reflected on how a single chance encounter had triggered such profound change. If Alexander's car hadn't broken down on that particular day, if Jack hadn't offered to help, if Sophie hadn't been researching the soil anomalies, how different everything might have been. Admiring the view? Alexander's voice came from behind him. 3 years of partnership had transformed their initial cautious alliance into genuine friendship. Alexander visited the valley regularly, taking personal interest in what had become Teranova's most successful regional operation. "Just thinking about how close we came to losing all this," Jack replied. "Another month, maybe less, and I'd have been forced to take Meridian's offer." Alexander nodded, understanding the weight of what might have been. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives don't announce themselves. They just appear as ordinary days with ordinary choices. Nothing ordinary about a CEO of an agricultural corporation getting stranded on my farm, Jack countered with a smile. True, but the ordinary choice was yours, to help a stranded stranger despite your own troubles. Alexander gestured toward the thriving fields. That simple decision changed everything, not just for you, but for this entire community. Jack couldn't argue with that assessment. The valley's transformation had exceeded even his most optimistic hopes. The Teranova partnership had not only saved his farm, but had revolutionized agriculture throughout the region. The cooperative model, preserving family farm ownership while providing access to advanced technology, fair pricing, and collective marketing power, had proven so successful that it was being replicated in farming communities across the country. Meridian, meanwhile, had faced the consequences of its predatory practices. The whistleblower documents had triggered investigations in multiple states, resulting in criminal convictions for several executives, including Richard Keller, massive fines, and a complete restructuring of the company under court supervision. The scandal had also prompted regulatory reforms designed to protect family farms from similar corporate tactics. As they walked back toward the farmhouse, now renovated and serving as both home and administrative center for the regional cooperative, they could see vehicles arriving for the quarterly meeting of valley farmers. The gathering had become a community tradition, combining business discussions with social celebration of their collective success. The old rivalries and isolation that had once characterized farming in the region had given way to collaboration and mutual support. Farmers who had once competed now shared equipment, coordinated planting schedules, and collectively marketed their products under the Teranova banner, receiving premium prices for their certified sustainable crops. Inside, Sophie was setting up presentation materials in the converted barn that now served as a community meeting space. The original structure had been preserved, but modern technology had been seamlessly integrated, another metaphor for the valley's approach to agriculture. The soil health metrics are off the charts this season, she told Jack and Alexander, enthusiastically. The mycorrhizal network we've established throughout the valley is functioning better than our models predicted. Nutrient efficiency is up 23%, while water requirements are down 17%. Jack smiled at his daughter's scientific excitement. Sophie had found her true calling in this work, bridging the gap between traditional farming knowledge and cutting-edge agricultural science. Her research team was publishing groundbreaking papers on soil rehabilitation and sustainable farming practices, drawing attention from environmental organizations and agricultural institutions worldwide. As the meeting began, Jack looked around. At the gathered farmers, a mix of weathered veterans and younger faces, all united by their commitment to a new vision of agriculture. Many had lost hope before the Teranova partnership had offered an alternative to either selling out or going bankrupt. Now they were pioneers in a movement that was spreading far beyond Willow Creek Valley. When it came time for Jack to address the group, he spoke from the heart about the journey they had undertaken together. 3 years ago, most of us were fighting losing battles in isolation. Today, we're showing the world what's possible when farmers work together and with partners who share our values. He nodded toward Alexander. When a stranger's car broke down on my property that day, I had no idea he represented not just a company, but a fundamentally different approach to agriculture, one that values family farms, sustainable practices, and community well-being alongside profitability. As Jack concluded his remarks, he looked out the barn's open doors toward his fields, where the afternoon sun illuminated the healthy crops that had seemed an impossible dream just 3 years earlier. The farm that had nearly been lost now stood as a symbol of renewal and possibility, Proof that even in the face of overwhelming corporate power, a different path was possible when people of good faith worked together toward a common vision. What had begun with a simple act of kindness, helping a stranded motorist fix his car, had transformed not just one farmer's future, but an entire community's destiny. And in that transformation lay a powerful lesson about the difference that ordinary people could make when they chose hope over despair, cooperation over isolation, and stewardship over exploitation. The desperate farmer who had once stood in a corporate boardroom with shocking evidence clutched in his weathered hands had found something more valuable than mere survival. He had rediscovered the true meaning of community and the enduring power of working in harmony with the land rather than against it. If you enjoyed this incredible true story of determination and unexpected alliances, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring real-life journeys. Click the notification bell so you don't miss next week's story about a homeless veteran who saved a small town from devastating floods, only to discover the town's mayor was his long-lost brother. Your comments mean the world to us, so let us know what you thought below, and check out our other videos right on your screen now.